Hello and welcome to Radically Embody Love Podcast. This is Nasrin Barbic with my lovely co-host, Jessica Falcon. And today we have a special guest, Melisa Keenan. And she is a founder of Hope, the heart-opening publishing enterprise. And for over 5 years, she has been helping individuals to share their heart through story with authentic self-expression. And thank you for being here, Melisa. I would love it if you start us off with your story and your unique healing code in your story.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. There's a lot of stories that I could share with you. And being a master of storytelling and a huge lover of storytelling, I kind of go, oh, what story do I share? But I think I'll start with this story. I didn't really know, and I think many people who go through hard things feel this way. I didn't really know that the things I had been through were extraordinary to other people until I started sharing about them. But I moved in with my aunt and uncle when I was 12 because my dad had died and my mom was unfit to raise me and had lost custody of me in a big court battle. And to lose custody of your child as a woman in the United States says that there was a lot that happened there that made the court make that decision, and there was. So that was, my childhood was very traumatic. And then when I was 12, I moved in with my aunt and uncle. And living with my aunt and uncle was like very like loving in the sense of we're here to take care of your needs, but not necessarily like we're here to be your parents or really get to know you or help you get to know yourself, or kind of the way that I approach parenting. And so I didn't get to talk very much about what I had been through or what I was going through or what I felt. And I was suicidal for much of my teens. And I think the beginning of activating my own story codes actually happened like during sleepovers. It was these, quiet hours of the night where like you're sleepy and the walls have started to come down with your friends and more honest things are now being spoken. And I can remember the first time that I shared with friends some of the horrific things that makes me emotional, that I had experienced. And having them the lights were off, we were all in our sleeping bags, but having them sit up and turn the lights on and go Melisa, you have been through that. Oh my gosh, you're amazing for what you have endured and how you've come out of all of that. And at the time I'm 13 something and going, oh, I didn't expect them to respond that way. And so I think we have these little activating moments in our lives, don't we? Where someone reflected our greatness to us in ways that we couldn't see it. And I think it's having had that experience enough times in my own life that has inspired me to want to be that person for other people, to say you have something amazing and let's get it out into the world because people need to hear your story.
What I really hear you saying, Melisa, is that when they saw you in that way, it really helped you see you differently.
Yeah.
Which is so beautiful, right? Like when we share something and we have our own internal story about it, our own internal beliefs, our own internal perceptions, and then somebody else has a different way of looking at it. And it can shift our own internal story when we see that reflected back. And what you just shared is such a beautiful reflection of that and the power of receiving a different reflection, a different perception, a different way of looking at ourselves. Because so often, particularly when we're young, we see ourselves through the eyes of others until we start to receive these other reflections and go, wait a minute, I can see myself differently, right? I have the power to see myself and not just take in the external world. And
yeah, I think too, when you're experiencing hardship, it's so common to, we all do this actually as a defense mechanism. We look at like, what did I do to create this circumstance in my life? Even if we were completely victimized and literally did nothing to create that circumstance in our lives, then boy, don't get me started, because then you add the spiritual movement on top of that. And then we are really like, well, somehow I manifested this and it's my fault.
Mhm.
And like, oh, it can be so damaging. All these beautiful tools that are meant to help us now become like whips that we use to beat ourselves for circumstances not turning out the way that we wanted them to. But it's human nature. And why do we do that? Why do we take it all on as ours? Well, because I have more control if it was my fault. If it's somebody else's fault and they're just spontaneously being rotten, I don't have any control over that, but I do have control over what I do. So it's easier for me to blame myself. But what that creates is this narrative of like, something's wrong with me. And like, I definitely believed that. It was like my dad had died, all these horrible things were happening, and I couldn't stop asking, like, what did I do to create this? What did I do to deserve this? Surely I must have done something wrong. This must be some kind of punishment. And I mean, that's actually still my knee-jerk reaction. I have to like consciously choose out of that when things are hard or cause me pain in my life. But I think it's through the power of storytelling that I have been able to recognize more that that's not true. Like, and that sometimes I just am a victim, and that's sucks, but it's not my fault. And then that's where we step into our power, truly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We often are very much conditioned to believe it's our fault when something bad, quote, or horrible happens to us. And I want to speak to the word victim because it's so misunderstood, especially I think in the spiritual community. And it deserves a special note that there's a difference between being a victim in the sense of feeling powerless, feeling like something is wrong with you, feeling like you have no choice, and continuing to live that way on a daily basis, and being victim to an event or circumstance. There's a big difference, and we often confuse the two when we're talking about victimhood. And coming from being a criminal prosecutor, I know very well, and having experienced a lot of my own trauma, that we are sometimes on a physical level victim to a circumstance. When somebody is raped, when somebody is harmed, when somebody is, right, there's somebody doing the action and there's somebody that's the recipient of the action. And in that moment, they have no choice because they're not asking for it. They're not doing anything wrong. They might actually be powerless in that situation, in that moment. And that is what we legally define as a victim. And then, right, it's like this fine line of how we honor that, recognize that, acknowledge the pain of being powerless, the pain of having no choice, the pain of being used, the pain of your soul not being seen and recognized, the pain of that, of somebody committing violence, of somebody ignoring your own choice and free will. It is painful, and it is hard to reckon with. It is hard to acknowledge. It is hard to be with because there is no justification for that. It's the denial of love. It is the denial of another person's sovereign choice. And it's the reality of war and rape and a lot of things that happen on this planet. And we are so much more than all of that, right? And that's where, when we start to tell our stories and weave this in, we also get to come into a higher perspective and take our power back from those situations through the wisdom, through the soul connection. And so I'm curious, what are the ways in which you have done that reclamation in your own life or through your own stories, or how other people can weave that in?
Well, it's interesting because often as a publisher, people will say to me, I don't know if my story's good enough. And I think that's such an interesting thing to say, because what they're really saying is, I don't know if my lived experience is enough to be of service to anyone. And I'm not even sure if the experiences I've been through have served me. Like, it actually goes so deep, right? So I really think the biggest difference between a story that doesn't inspire and a story that does inspire is the person sharing the story and what they believe about themselves and the story. That's the only difference. So every story to me is good enough. It's just a matter of, are you willing to do the inner work enough that it takes to be able to claim your story in a way that you now feel empowered and have a deeper sense of who you are. Like you're saying, taking ourselves out of that victim place. But I have some other thoughts too about this, idea of I don't want to play the victim card. I don't want to be the victim. Like, that for me actually became very toxic. And it was a way to bypass all of the PTSD and real feelings that I was having, that that some days I would be a victim too. But instead of actually just experiencing the PTSD or experiencing the deep grieving or, whatever it was, I would just push myself to go achieve something great so that I didn't look like I was playing the victim card. It felt like, because of my lived experiences, everyone in my family and like family friends, like all the authority type figures in my life as a kid, were looking to me always with this question of like, is she going to turn out? Or is she going to allow these circumstances to define her in a negative way? And so I felt tremendous pressure to use my experiences to define me in a positive way. And sometimes that meant being really mean to myself. So I think it's interesting because I found myself kind of swinging on a pendulum with that. And what has felt the most empowering is to actually just let go of this whole victim conversation completely. Honor when I was, like, I love what you said, legally defined as a victim, honor that. And then just love the crap out of myself for whatever comes up in any given moment in any given day. And that's a practice. But that's definitely where I feel the most empowered, is truly like if I could take that into a tangible example, it's like when emotions come up and I feel uncomfortable, it's the ability to stop and I put my hands on my heart and I like tap over my heart and I'm speaking to my inner child like, hey, this is uncomfortable, this is hard. And then talking to her about like, hey, I know that you just want to go and do some big achievement to put a Band-Aid over these feelings. Like, I know you want to run really fast. We call it trauma drive. And maybe it's okay to just feel. And it's a daily practice, isn't it? A daily practice to just, yeah. Or sometimes I look back and go, oh yeah, you were running for like a year. It's okay. Again, my hands are back on my heart and like, it's okay. Now we see we can do different.
Yeah, it sure is a daily practice, right? And it is a process that includes processing our feeling and understanding ourselves in a better way. And as you were mentioning, I was thinking, yeah, it's like we all have that moment that we realize it's not what happened to us, it's the meaning that we made, that what it meant, who we are, that is causing us the suffering in that story. And it's very common when we are young and things are happening, we think everything is personal. As you were mentioning, is we can't understand the shortcoming of our parents and people we depend on. Therefore, I am not worthy of their love, or I am something inherently not right with me. Therefore, these things are happening to me. And then, unfortunately, that we take those beliefs and unknowingly bring it to our adulthood, which therefore affects our relationship in adulthood and what we do. But it is the process of recognition of that, and then examining our belief and seeing that we might have, most likely we needed those beliefs to survive in one way or another as a child, right? But no longer is serving me, and see through that what is the empowering belief that is true in this, based on my true nature and who I am, and how can I make that transition? And all of this is a daily practice and process that we do. And I do know the power of our story, and as you were mentioning, that is like sometimes we don't recognize that story ourselves, and when we are telling our story and somebody else is hearing it and giving us that reflection that, wow, this is a very profound story, especially when we are out of that story and we are not emotionally in that victimhood of what happened to me, but we've seen it that as a stepping stone that help us grow to who we are now. That's when the story has the power, I believe, not when we're in it. That's why we don't recognize it, because we're still struggling with that emotions that is there for us, seeing ourselves as a victim, not good enough. But in our journey, if we recognize that, that's where our power lies, in that story and how we move through it. And that can become an empowering story that we can share and help somebody else who's going through the same thing see that and move forward in that. So when you help others to come up with the message on their story, or the really what you call the healing code of their message, do you go through the process as helping them see it, or they already passed their story and they come to you, it's like, I want to talk about how this story and what happened to me helped me grow and become who I am today in that perspective?
Normally, when people are ready to talk to a publisher, they've already kind of figured that out. But nevertheless, so it's more in my free stuff where people are being awoken to the reality that they have a story to share that could be beneficial or powerful. And so probably most of the people in my community, or my audience, if you will, have no idea that that's what's happening to them. And I primarily do that by just sharing my own story. Little facets of a tiny day, all the way to, huge traumas that happened in my childhood and everything in between. But it's so cool because, I just shared on my social media probably 3 weeks ago a story about how I have recently been called into bee shamanism, this like bee animism, like a relationship with bees. And I just have gone crazy. I like love the bees. I have felt like they've called me. I have like communication with them. I go and sit with them regularly, and it's been so cool. And so I just wrote a post about that, like literally that I'm talking to bees, and probably most people think it's nuts. And at the end, I gave an invitation to be a part of a book project that I was running. The book is called Manifesting Magical Moments, and that will be launching in June. And it's got a collection of stories kind of like that. And the point to me was, I was just sharing from my heart, like it came to my heart to share that story. And it's a big part of my life right now. And I literally had no idea if anyone would read it and go, oh my gosh, I'm inspired and I have a story to share for this book. I really didn't know. And it was amazing to me how many people reached out after I shared that story, because I think that's one really neat aspect of storytelling, is that just someone else being embodied in their story and empowered in their story and sharing that, like, in almost like inspires or catalyzes that wisdom within us. And so it's this beautiful shared experience. And I think that's what's so amazing about storytelling. Like, storytelling actually is an ancient art and power and force that has really carried humanity. Before we had writing or procedures for how things were to be done, everything was just handed down through story. And stories were preserved and they were held as sacred, and story time around a campfire was considered like their soul nourishment. It was like, this is where we come and we hear the stories and we remember who we are. And it still has that effect. And I think it's so fun not to go off on too much of a tangent with this, because I just love storytelling so much. But like, the internet and Amazon have really changed the publishing industry massively, where, just 20 years ago, if you wanted to have your story published, you were looking at a multiple year process of hoping that someone saw your story and thought it was valuable. A traditional publishing house, you're applying, you may never get chosen. You may have written multiple manuscripts and, died sad that no one thought your story was valuable and therefore you were never able to publish. Like, so sad. But, that's the reality. And then the internet and Amazon came along and said, you could self-publish. It like flew the doors open. And I think we'll look back on this time in history and we'll see, oh my gosh, there was this flood of stories because so many people were given this permission of like, yes, like, we want to hear your stories. And it's happening both, internet and Amazon. It's happening there. That's kind of a more surface aspect. It's also happening in our hearts. Like, my ancestors never told their stories. I'm like, I'm one of these people who love family history, and I'm like pulling all these like puzzle pieces to try and figure out who was my grandmother and why did she make the choices she made? Because you can guarantee she wasn't telling that story. But we now are like, wait, there is value to my story and I want to share it. And I have all these platforms where I can share it. And now our children's children can hold those stories in their hand like we hold scripture in our hands. It's just really amazing.
It is amazing. And what I know I've confronted within myself and sharing my own story are all the deep fears of being that seen, of being that vulnerable, of being that radically honest, and other people having the capacity. If you write the depths of your personal experience, what you're doing is you're giving other people a capacity to see parts of you might not otherwise exposed, to see your dark fears, to see the traumas, to see the shame, to see the guilt. And I worked for 10 years writing and rewriting and living and embodying my own story. And so much of what I had to confront was internal. It wasn't so much about what anybody else said, because it didn't matter how many people told me how wonderful, how many people told me how insightful or how valuable. I had to do the inner work of me owning the value of my own story, of me seeing my voice matters. People actually care, believing people wanted to hear what I had to say. because that wasn't my experience in the real world. People didn't want to hear me growing up. People didn't want to hear my feelings. I was too sensitive. They didn't matter. It was too much. It was a burden, right? And so one of the things I hear you saying in your own experience, what I've seen and experienced in my own, is how much like of an empowering journey sharing your story can be, because it brings up all of these deeply subconscious fears and wounds so that we can really bring forward not just a story, but our deepest, truest expression. It is, as our voice is our, right, to me, our voice. We bring our insides and make them visible to the outside world. That's huge. That's huge, especially as a women, right? Like, we have been told not to tell our stories, and men and women have been told, well, the feeling part doesn't matter. And so there's so much transformation in that. And I wonder if you could speak to what specific challenges you've seen, writers that you've worked with or within yourself that you've had to really confront to be able to share your story, or even to want to share your story.
I loved everything you said, and a lot of the things you said are things I often say about being seen. And so I've spent the last 6 years as an intimacy coach, helping support women, business owners, and couples to experience deeper intimacy. And when I came into the publishing industry, a lot of people looked at it and said, what? Like, you're an intimacy coach. And I'm like, this is the same. This is exactly the same. Intimacy, I always have defined as intimacy. I didn't come up with that. I heard it once and absolutely fell in love. I don't know who came up with it. Intimacy, that's what true intimacy is. And we're confronted with intimacy always. Like, I can't tell you how many people said, call yourself something else, like relationship coach, anything. Like, intimacy, that's a trigger word. It is a trigger word. And obviously, yeah, there's sexual reasons why it's a trigger word, but why? Again, because we don't want to be seen. Like, and every aspect of this is challenging to be seen and to be known. And it always comes from within, just as you said. It's our insides coming to the outside. And how do we feel about that? I always, as a kid, like, that question of what kind of superpower did you daydream about when you were a kid and wish that you had? Flying was one, but the other one that was extremely common for me was daydreaming about being able to, like, read people's minds. But it wasn't just their mind. It was like, I really wanted them to have everything that was in the inside of them on the outside. Then I would just know. I would know what they were thinking, what they were feeling, like what made them them. That was what I would think about as a kid. And that is the process. And I also think that our intuition is involved in that process as well, and can't be overlooked. It's like, because if we don't connect, we don't truly see ourselves, we don't really know what we want, we don't really know what we feel, we don't really know when something feels right for us or not right for us. Like, so actually, intimacy is just everything in life. But unfortunately, it's not taught. It's not, for many of us, it's like not even experienced. It's like almost from the moment we leave the womb, we're like conditioned to get away from that feely stuff and just perform in our world. And I think our world is shifting now. And so a lot of us are sort of like waking up to this and kind of confronting this very uncomfortable piece of, how do I really know myself? But I would always say to couples, you cannot connect more deeply with someone or expect someone else to see deeply into you, deeper than you've been willing to go in yourself. Just like you can't expect someone to love you more than you love yourself. So it's an internal game first. And, this is part of, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but I created a guide to help you activate your story codes. And it's just a free guide that, I'm actually still like very tweaking, very in process with the thing, because I want to get it to a place that it's really deeply supportive of people. But we could talk about this all day, and we said this before the call started. We could talk about this all day, but we have to actually go and do the confrontation with our own story. Like, we have to go do the into me see work. We have to sit down with the yucky, messy stuff that we've wanted to keep tucked away forever, and that we thought would die with us. Like, we would take it to our grave and actually excavate it and go, these are all the things this makes me feel. This is what I've made this mean. And this is what I wish I could experience with this story that happened in my life. This is what I want for this. And I'll say from experience that doing that process also involves like making things right. Because sometimes we look at our story and we're like, I'm really not proud of how I chose to behave in that situation. And then we just want to bury it. And unfortunately, we'll never feel empowered. That story and that choice, that lapse of judgment or thing we did out of desperation or thing we did when we weren't fully educated or whatever it was, it holds power over us as long as we feel shame about it, as long as we feel like we can't talk about it. So sometimes we have to do that excavation and look at those things and go, you know what? I need to do something to make amends about this situation. Like, and that's a whole process. I spent, 9 years, my husband and I, in the 12-step addiction recovery program. I just think 12 steps are amazing for anybody who's like listening, going, there's way too much stuff. There's no way I could never. Nope. Like, I would highly recommend a 12-step program. I feel like it's like 12 steps of how to live, not necessarily just 12 steps of how to get over an addiction. But, and it's such a gift. I look back and I go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that was preparing me to become a publisher and to become a 6-time best-selling author and all of these things, because I've made peace with all the crappy choices I have made in my life. And now I can talk about them. I can talk about any of them without feeling this like, oh my gosh, if people knew this about me, no one would love me, no one would accept me, or no one would accept my leadership or whatever. I don't feel that anymore. And that's what, in turn makes my story powerful. It's just because I don't feel that anymore and I'm willing to talk about anything.
Yeah, because you've done your work and you're telling your story from that empowered place, not the lack. And that makes a huge difference. And I love it when you say, like, it starts with the intimacy with ourselves, which is so true. Your own relationship with yourself is the most important relationship you can have. So writing a book or telling your story, however you choose to say it, it could help you in that process of reigniting that, getting to know yourself better as you're sharing your story and reconnecting in a way with yourself. And as you mentioned, also the importance of self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness. The fact that we have made decision that now, if we look back, say, oh, it wasn't the best decision, but at that place where we were with the consciousness that we had, that's the best decision we could make at that moment. And we need to see and forgive ourselves for what we think we should have done differently at this point. And those are all the deeper work we encourage everybody to do as they go through this journey. Do it with self-compassion and self-love, because we've done enough of self-judgment, and we all have that voice that constantly is badgering us, and but we need to get past that, and that's the only way we do it, through self-love and self-compassion. And when we write our story, not only like we do benefit or tell our story from seeing it in different perspective now since we've gone through it. I was reading your story a little bit in your website, and I'm like, oh, I so resonate with this story of your relationship, what happened, leaving, coming back. And I'm like, and this is our commonality. This is what, like, humanity, when we share our story, there's somebody's there thinking, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in experiencing this. I'm not alone that think I have no self-worth. I'm not alone in thinking I'm lonely, whatever the story is coming with. And then that person is empowered through your story to feel like, I'm not alone. And if she got through it and she has moved through it, so can I. And I think that's the power that comes from sharing our story. And but I totally agree that we can really tell our story from an empowered place when we've done our work first, when we can share things that we think that, oh, maybe it wasn't such a good idea, but we say it from empowered place, that we have made that peace and within ourselves, and with the love and compassion that now we can have our story really shows our humanity, that we all go through that. We all have those moments. We all have a past. We all have a childhood. And I don't care what kind of childhood you had. We all have sort of trauma with a small t, no matter what, that we need to work through so we can move past that. So thank you for sharing. Go ahead.
I have just a little piece to add to that too, where like, what am I talking about? We have healing codes embedded in our story. Like, what kind of woo-woo nonsense is that, right? But it's actually super cool. They've proven this scientifically, that when you read someone's writing, the longer you read it, the more your brainwaves start to match with the brainwaves of the author of the story. So there's actually, now we can say, even on a tangible sciencey level, there's actually evidence of that. And so it makes sense for us to go in and do this work and change how we view ourselves, because how we view ourselves, the author is naturally like adopting that view of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot like parenting, where it's actually more about what we're being that our children take in, as opposed to like what we're teaching. And that's part of my passion with publishing, is sharing real stories that people have lived and experienced, or any kind of stories, even stories that they have invented and created that teach something, as opposed to sharing a lot of how-tos, because it's the stories that actually change us. It's more about like, how were they being and who were they being and what does this make me feel, as opposed to like, tell me the 17 things I'm supposed to do to change this thing. I really feel like our new earth is like, as we are reevaluating how we've done things and we're changing the way that we do things, we're stepping into this reality that like, oh yeah, that was your path to enlightenment, but tell me the story about it instead of teaching me the tools, and let me find my path to enlightenment, because it's different for each of us. Like, how can your experience actually activate my inner wisdom, as opposed to how can your tools teach me how to get success the way you did? There's just so much power in us doing that inner work. Like, I think it's definitely understated. I mean, in the business world, no one's talking about this, right? Like, it's just, no, like, you found a system that worked for you, now teach it as if it's the only system that makes any sense. Even personal development, it's like, everybody's got a new system, and the systems are great, and it's wonderful that they can teach and deliver tools. But what really is changing their clients is who they're being, and then the client's experience with that person and who they're being. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's clear that you're passionate about it, so I love it. So you already mentioned or hint about your free gift. So if you want to say anything else we wrap up, any last word of wisdom? And if somebody wants to start in this journey of sharing their story, where they can find you or however you want to.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, the Activate Your Story Codes guide is full of a lot of unusual things that you wouldn't expect to be there. Like there's even a page about dreaming and drawing wisdom from your dreams, like what your subconscious is trying to tell you. There's like dance pages because it's emotional and we have to move our bodies to get the energy flowing again. Writing is such a healing process. I think we have to approach it a bit more like that. So definitely, if this has resonated with you, and even if you have shared your story and you're just seeking to go a little deeper, that guide would be beneficial. You can find that at www.melisakeenan.com, and it'll just pop right up for you to opt into that, and certainly opts you into my community with my email list. And you can also find me on Facebook. I'm super active there. Final words of wisdom. I think I would just say we are so tremendous. Our human potential is so tremendous. Any attempt towards realizing that or remembering that is worth it. But also as we do that, if we're willing to share that, it helps people. And how great, right, to go through this life and feel like I've accessed peace and wholeness and healing within myself, but I've also been able to facilitate in some way that peace and wholeness and healing in others.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your presence with us today on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And to all of our listeners, we look forward to hearing your comments. If you have any questions, we thank you for being here and sharing the power of your story. So whether you receive the free gift that Melissa's offering, go to the link and start to play with that. And just the power of seeing yourself, right? The power of being yourself, the power of expressing yourself is a huge takeaway from this. So thank you all for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time.